Well, Tom, Marissa, and Steve, it's very nice to see you, and I trust you're keeping well during these COVID times.
Yeah, hope you are too.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Absolutely.
So, Tom, the world of intellectual property, I know you're spending a lot of time looking at that area. Tell me what you're doing.
Sure, Rodney. Well, as you know, we used to have annual meetings where we would get together and people who practice in this area around the country would share ideas, and typically we'd try to formalize those, in some way. And COVID has really, first of all, put an end to face-to-face meetings, but we've also learned that developments in this area, don't wait until we meet annually. And so we put together a group of partners who work in this area from the major economies and the countries that tend to be centers of IP ownership to, on a real-time basis, just share what's going on locally. So we meet every 2 weeks, and we've discussed the country's specific approaches to IP development and management and ownership. And I think, what we found is that you could say that countries have a carrot and stick approach to IP development and ownership. And by the carrot, what I mean is countries like to have R&D jobs. They also like to have IP owned in their jurisdiction. And so we see that countries have a variety of incentives to having local research and development activities. And those take three primary forms. First, many countries offer super deductions, so deductions of more than 100% of the costs incurred. Second, they offer research and development credits. And then third, some offer patent boxes or innovation boxes that have been scaled to be appropriate under the OECD guidelines on harmful tax practices. So the benefit is scaled to the local activity. Now, having said that broadly, these provisions tend to be fairly detailed and complex. And so the implementation in each country differs significantly. And one of the benefits of our group is that we're able to discuss the specific requirements for qualifying for all these incentives.
So that's really interesting, Tom. And I got to imagine the carrots, I got to imagine that's an ever-changing field, particularly with what's going on with BEPS these days too.
No question.
So Steve, Tom mentioned carrots and sticks. I'm just interested in your perspective on what's going on in the sticks part of this world.
Well, yeah, it's pretty interesting and very, very active. So, of course, countries want to offer these incentives to get the activities and the IP developed in their area. Conversely, what they don't want is the income associated with that IP going someplace else. And that's really where the sticks come in. I think most people are familiar with this DEMPI concept, which is, came out through the BEPS 1.0 changes back a number of years ago, which, broadly speaking, says we want the IP income to go where the major activities of developing and guiding that IP are, and where key risks are managed in the company. Another thing that has been evolving quite a lot is the rules with respect to really just the concept of what constitutes IP and what needs to be paid for. Treatment of amounts that might, for accounting purposes, be goodwill. It's a very, very hot and important area here. All of this is evolving, and in the OECD guidelines, which are the consensus guidelines on this, are really phrased more at the level of concepts. And there's a lot of ambiguity about how those rules are applied in practice. And so a really interesting thing that we're trying to track is what governments are actually doing in terms of how they're interpreting those rules, what they're requiring in terms of DEMPI, how they're applying the hard to value intangibles concept. So it's really important to just understand what countries are doing, what is happening on audits, and what's happening, in competent authority proceedings on this stuff. And that's, a big thing we're doing is tracking that. Marissa, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of trying to gather audit insights and keep track of that?
Sure. Yeah, so a few years ago, we started an initiative to formally collect and document stories of our experiences in the international tax controversy space. So this gives us a really great picture of where we're seeing enforcement activity, what the big issues are, and where we've been successful in resolving disputes and how we've done so. So as part of this initiative, KPMG has developed a collection of over 200 anonymized tax examination stories on various cross-border issues, such as transfer pricing, attribution of profits, exit taxes, goodwill amortization, and really the full gamut of issues that come up. And each of these stories is taken from a particular tax examination, but then it's anonymized so that the story can be shared without revealing any confidential information. And we can use these lessons learned from these stories to inform how to mitigate risk and how to respond to challenges when they come up. Just a couple of examples of some of the stories we've collected about the DEMPI issues that Steve mentioned. We have a number of stories where the tax authorities have asserted that compensation for certain DEMPI functions could not be appropriately measured with a cost plus basis. These countries, Israel, UK, for example, have been asserting that profit splits are more appropriate. We also have a number of stories where changes to these functions on these key development, management and risks, those functions have changed, and therefore the countries have asserted that exit taxes were appropriate, for example. So we have a really a large and growing library of these stories. So any companies that are interested should reach out to their local KPMG contacts or to any of us to learn more about it.
So that's really interesting, Marissa, because I can imagine that just being able to know what a particular tax authority thinks about an issue really helps an organization think about their own tax posture and what they should be doing. And are you starting to see sort of more common trends evolving as you see more and more of these examples between countries?
We definitely are. Just as another example, on there's been a lot of questions about what happens with country by country information. And we're starting to see a couple of countries in particular, they're jumping out as really using that C by C information as kind of the start of their audits, or sometimes actually even making adjustments based on that data. And so we are, in goodwill amortization has been a big issue in some countries. And just it really is helping to paint a big picture as to what the issues that tax authorities are focusing on. A lot of activity in transfer pricing space, for example, as well. So it's really been interesting to follow the trends and seeing where we're seeing threads among different jurisdictions.
Fascinating. So Steve, what are we going to be doing in the future then?
Well, I think the point is that nothing is static, nothing is staying still right now. Not only do we have a lot of information, not only do we have a bunch of relatively new rules that we're continuously receiving new information on how they're being interpreted and how companies can best defend their positions on it, but we've got another whole massive wave of very different rules coming at us through BEPS 2.0 and all the associated legislation and national changes that are going on beyond that. So none of this stuff is staying still, and everything needs to be kept really up to date in terms of helping our clients figure out the best way to both respond to things going forward and to defend the positions they've got. And so really the point of this whole group is to really keep our communication up and have real-time tracking around the world, so we're all talking to each other and able to best share information and get the best resources and advice to our clients.
Really interesting. I guess that goes back, Tom, to your initial point, which is there's just a heck of a lot of change in this space, and you have to have a global team like this just to have a chance of keeping up to date and advising people properly.
Yeah, there's no question about that, Rodney. It's going to continue to change. I mean, to the point Marissa was making, we see that over the last 5 years, there's been a tendency to look beyond legal ownership of IP and look at where DEMPI functions occur, and for countries that don't own the IP legally, ask for a profit share. And as we've seen workforces becoming more dispersed, and I think COVID has only accelerated that, that's going to be a big issue, and companies need to get on top of that so that they can anticipate the kind of challenges we're seeing. You would rather have your transfer pricing paradigm set up ahead of time so you can be responsive with a good answer to the tax authorities rather than responding to their characterization of what's going on.
Well, Marissa, Steve, and Tom, just a fascinating topic and a great discussion. Thank you. It's just fascinating to hear what we're doing in this space. Thank you for your time, and stay healthy during these COVID times, huh?